On September 15th, I made it to Stanley, population 63, elevation 6,253 feet. Stanley's a gateway to one of the largest designated wilderness areas in the contiguous 48 states. The record low temperatures here rival the record lows at McMurdo Station, Antarctica, and the grocery store has a wind chill chart permanently taped up in the window. The streets aren't paved, and almost every building in town is a motel. I celebrated my arrival with a taco salad from the Romanians running the sports bar and settled in for a rainy night by the river of no return. The next day, I headed for the corral of Mystic Saddle Ranch to see a lady about a horse. 65 horses, actually. Because of its peculiar circumstances, Stanley is one of the few places in the West where pack horses still mean business.
My name is Deb Bitton, and my husband Jeff and I own and operate a horsepacking operation in the Sawtooth Wilderness. This is his 45th year doing it. His family started it in 1969. We've been married since 80. So this is my 33rd year. We are probably the biggest horse outfitters in the state of Idaho. We do everything from as short as an hour because people want that experience to be able to say, yes, I've been on a horse, and some for the very first time. We've done as long as 16 days and moved from one end to the wilderness to the other. But primarily, those horses are used for short rides. Our backcountry use is way down because our society is so urban, so plugged in, if you will, that they don't know how to sleep in a sleeping bag. They don't want to be without their cell phone. They don't know how to poo in the woods, and they don't really want to poo in the woods. I had a woman that hiked out about 4 or 5 years ago, a woman that was in her 40s. And she'd never been in that much darkness. And that terrified her.
So she hiked out?
She hiked out. She stayed up all night. And she hiked out the next morning. People have become pretty cushy. Now many of our guests want cots and warm water in the morning. And of course tents. You wouldn't go without a tent. And
whereas previously you would go without a tent.
Yeah, you potentially would. Yes, right. For a fully catered trip, we charge about $260 to $270 a day. So if you went on an overnight, it would be $550.
Yeah.
So it's not that cheap.
So does that also tend to skew it toward more comfortable people?
Yes, it does. It does. You have to be middle income.
What's the team of guides like?
Mixed. We have women and men. We have married and single. To be a guide in the state, we're the most regulated state in the nation because we had the most outfitters, and we wanted to be professional. So to be a guide in the state of Idaho, you have to be 18 years old, free of fish and game violations, and you have to have a current first aid and CPR card. If you have horse experience, that's a bonus for us. We don't mind training people about horses, but it's hard to train somebody if they're not a people person.
What's the off-season like?
In this valley, we have a very short season. We really don't open till June 15th, and it's September 15th, and this is really our last couple of days. You know, we basically have 100 days here. So many outfitters do something else in the wintertime, or they have another job. 15 years ago, we moved to Phoenix, Arizona in the wintertime, took the horses with us. And so
Must be quite a caravan.
It is 1,100 miles. Yes. So we have commercial haulers that help us.
When you go down to Arizona, what are the things that strike you as being most different?
There we offer hour and a half, 2 hour and 3 hour rides. Nobody wants to do the 2 or the 3 hour ride. Too long.
Wow.
Too long. We let them dress up in boots, hats, and chaps.
Yeah.
They like that. So it's much more tourist. Yeah, Idaho just reached the 1 million people mark in the whole state, opposed to Phoenix, which is 4 million, the town. Stanley's kind of a place that you either love it or you hate it, because it's everything you wanted. It's Mecca, or it's hell, because it's too remote, no shopping, all of those things.
I mean, is Boise close enough?
Yeah, that's where I have to shop, because I do all the food for our pack trips, our multi-day trips. So I have to have, 25 pounds of sugar and 100 pounds of flour and those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
to get that kind of food, you got to go to Boise or you've got to go to Twin Falls.
And what round trip is that in terms
It's 130 miles to Boise, about 130 miles each way, so 260 miles round trip.
Remoteness is probably the main reason this town exists at all. Few people even passed through here until miners set up camp in the late 1800s. That didn't pan out. And even when the railroad came to the Snake River Plain, about 100 miles away, Stanley was still so far in the back of beyond that isolation was the main thing that made it special. It wasn't on the way to anywhere, and the winters are so long and so brutally cold that a permanent town would never have been able to support itself without visitors who really liked the idea of getting away from it all.
Even as early as the early 1900s, late 1800s, people would come on a tourist-based situation here to spend the summer. They'd take the train as far as Shoshone. They'd get off. They'd get on a buggy or a wagon, and they would go as far as Sun Valley. That was one day. The next day they would go to the bottom of the summit, which was about another 23, 25 miles to Galena.
Yeah.
Galena in its own right was a huge mining area. They would then take the wagon up to the top of the Galena summit. They'd cut a tree down and tie it on the back of the wagon. That was their break.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, as they went down the mountain. And then at the bottom of the hill was a pile of the logs. The Sawtooth Wilderness became a wilderness in 1972. And just a few years prior to that, the Frank Church Wilderness was designated. And a wilderness is special designation. So nothing motorized, nothing mechanized. So you can't have a radio, you can't have even really an egg beater. Currently, we have no grazing in the Sawtooth Wilderness. You can graze in the White Clouds, and you can do some grazing in certain areas in the Frank Church. But if we were to do a 16-day trip in the White Cloud or in the Sawtooth, we would have to pre-position our horse feed.
What kind of bulk of feed are we talking about?
We have 80-pound sacks, 160 pounds per horse. And one bag will do 3 horses for 2 feedings.
And how many feedings per day?
2.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a ton of cargo just
Yes,
keeping horses
absolutely,
going.
absolutely.
If-
And that's one of the reasons why we won't have a long, we could, in reality, we could put all our horse feed and go those 16 days, but we also have to feed every one of those cargo horses that feed. So it becomes a huge event.
Yeah. The paradox of American wilderness is that in a society driven by short-term profit, it typically takes exhaustive government restrictions to keep a place like Stanley from being mined, drilled, clear-cut, or ranched into a shambles, leaving tourism as the only external source of income for locals who want to get a living. But tourism can only do this if lots of people can come from far away, quickly and efficiently. And that not only requires substantial infrastructure, but also threatens to undo the promise of pristine isolation that attracts them in the first place. On the one hand, Stanley needs highways, because it needs tourists to be comfortable driving in from Boise or Sun Valley. On the other hand, it needs Deb Bitton to pack in special feed to keep her horses from eating the grass. It's all part of the artifice and illusion of the natural American landscape, the backdrop for the romance of the Wild West.
We are in the business of memory making. I have a client that's done 12 trips with us. She went on a pack trip when she was in her teens. And the outfitter was this rugged cowboy kind of thing. And she never forgot that pack trip. She married, she had 2 or 3 kids. She ultimately divorced her husband, came back, actually stole the outfitter away from his wife, and outfitted with this man for about 20 years. She's 85. We take her and her family. She's got like 13 in her family. She pays for them to come every time. For me, this is my office.
Yeah.
And what kind of a sweet gig is that?
It is an impressive place, and it got even more impressive when the snow came in. I'd been expecting a new pair of shoes at the post office, but they got held up. And despite the friendliness of everyone I met in town, and the hospitality of a painter who gave me a place to sleep, the changing weather made an ominous impression. When my shoes arrived, and when I'd done my dissatisfying best to keep in touch with the home front, my first morning back on the road was agonizingly cold. I needed new gloves fast.